A building does not collapse all at once. It gives you warnings long before the final crash. A hairline fracture in the foundation concrete, a door that suddenly refuses to sit flush in its frame, a subtle groan in the joists when the wind changes direction. If you have spent your life building structures from the ground up, you learn to pay attention to these quiet signals. At 71, my mind had started giving me a few warnings. Nothing catastrophic. I would walk into my kitchen and forget why I opened the refrigerator. I would misplace my reading glasses only to find them resting on the morning newspaper. I took it seriously. I went to my doctor, took the cognitive tests, and was prescribed a mild daily maintenance capsule to help with blood flow and memory retention. It was a manageable reality of aging. But my son, Marcus, treated a minor structural shift as an excuse for total demolition. I stood in the hallway of the home I had built with my own 2 hands 30 years ago. My fingers traced the grain of the custom oak banister. Every piece of timber in this house had been selected and placed by me. It was a home built for endurance, a place that held the echoes of my late wife's laughter and the early years of Marcus's childhood. Now, there were 3 small duffel bags sitting by the front door. "Dad, come on, we need to get moving," Marcus called out, pacing near the entryway. He checked his phone for the 4th time in 2 minutes. He was dressed in his usual uniform, an expensive tailored suit that always looked a little too tight across the shoulders, purchased to project the image of a successful real estate developer. "I'm coming, Marcus," I said, my voice steady, though a quiet resentment simmered in my chest. Over the past month, Marcus and his wife, Elena, had become suffocatingly attentive. They insisted I shouldn't be living alone in such a large house. They claimed they were worried about my declining state. The relentless pressure had worn me down, and, in a moment of exhaustion, I agreed to stay in their guest room for a few weeks just to give them peace of mind. I thought I was easing my son's anxiety. I had no idea I was walking into a trap. "Elena has the guest room all set up," Marcus said, not meeting my eyes as he grabbed 2 of the bags. "You'll be much safer with us monitoring you. You've been slipping, Dad. We all see it." I frowned, zipping up my leather shaving kit. "I forgot where I put the car keys on Tuesday, Marcus. I didn't forget my own name." Marcus offered a tight, patronizing smile. Better safe than sorry. An hour later, I was sitting in the guest room of Marcus's house. If my home was a testament to warmth and craftsmanship, Marcus and Elena's house was a monument to sterile ambition. It was a modern, sprawling monstrosity of cold gray stone, glass, and sharp angles. It felt like living inside a very expensive filing cabinet. The only warmth in that house came from my 12-year-old grandson, Leo. The door creaked open, and Leo slipped into the room. He was a quiet, observant boy, carrying a heavy, hand-carved wooden chessboard under one arm and a battered old smartphone in his other hand. "Hey, Grandpa," he said, setting the board down on the small table near the window. "Hello, Leo," I smiled, feeling the tension bleed out of my shoulders. "You ready to lose your queen again?" Leo smirked, taking a seat and carefully lining up his black pieces. "You taught me better than that." I had given Leo the old smartphone 2 years ago when I upgraded mine. It didn't have a cellular plan, but it still connected to the internet, and I had told him to take it apart, figure out how it worked, and learn the architecture of it. Instead, he used it for chess tutorials, reading, and tinkering with audio software. He set the device down next to the board, its cracked screen glowing faintly. As we played, I watched him. Leo didn't rush. He analyzed the board, looking 3 moves ahead. Marcus never had that kind of patience. Marcus always wanted the reward without pouring the foundation. It was my greatest failure as a father, shielding Marcus from consequence for so long after his mother died that he never developed any structural integrity of his own. "You're trapping my knight," Leo murmured, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I am," I agreed. "But look at what I had to expose to do it. Sometimes, Leo, you have to sacrifice a piece to see your opponent's true strategy. Hollow pillars eventually crack under their own weight. You just have to let the pressure build and wait for them to snap." Leo looked up at me, absorbing the words. He nodded slowly and moved his pawn, bypassing my trap entirely. I laughed, a genuine sound that felt rare these days. Our game was interrupted by Elena pushing the door open. She didn't knock. Elena always moved through the world as if she owned every square inch of it. She was holding a small silver tray with a glass of water and a single blue and white capsule. "Time for your medicine, Arthur," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We need to keep that mind sharp." "I usually take it with dinner," I noted, looking at the clock. It was barely 4 in the afternoon. Doctor's instructions say late afternoon is better for absorption. Elena lied smoothly, holding the tray closer. Drink up. I didn't argue. I took the pill, swallowed it with the water, and handed the glass back. Elena smiled, a thin, predatory stretching of her lips, and left the room. Within 30 minutes, the chess pieces began to blur. It started as a heaviness behind my eyes, a thick, suffocating weight that pressed down on my temples. My tongue felt like it was made of lead. I tried to focus on the board, but my thoughts were fragmenting, slipping through my grasp like dry sand. A deep, unnatural exhaustion pulled at my bones. Grandpa? Leo's voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. Are you okay? Just a little tired, Leo, I slurred, terrified by the sound of my own voice. It didn't sound like me. It sounded like an old, broken man. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to ground myself, but the room spun. I need to lie down. I barely made it to the bed before the heavy, unnatural darkness dragged me under. I did not know it then, but while I was trapped in a chemical prison of their making, my grandson was wide awake. It was past midnight when Leo crept out of his bedroom to get a glass of water. The house was completely silent, save for the low hum of the refrigerator and the hushed, urgent whispers coming from the kitchen. Leo stopped in the shadowed hallway, pressing his back against the wall. The bank called again today, Marcus was saying, his voice tight with panic. They're giving me 30 days before they call the commercial loan on the Plaza project. If I don't inject capital immediately, I'm bankrupt, Elena. Everything goes. This house, the cars, everything. Keep your voice down, Elena hissed. We have the solution. Your father's trust is worth $5 million. It's sitting right there. I don't have control of it, Marcus groaned. He's stubborn. He won't just sign it over to cover my debts. He'd tell me to figure it out myself. Which is why he isn't going to have a choice, Elena replied. From his hiding spot, Leo peered around the corner. The kitchen island was illuminated by a single pendant light. Elena was standing there with my orange prescription bottle, but she wasn't just holding it. She had a pile of empty blue and white capsules on a paper towel. Next to them was a bottle of heavy, over-the-counter sleep aids and sedatives. Leo watched in silent horror as his mother systematically crushed the sedatives into a fine white powder, scooped the powder into my empty prescription capsules, and snapped them shut. The emergency guardianship hearing is in 2 weeks, Elena said, her tone entirely devoid of empathy. The lawyer said we need a documented pattern of severe, rapid cognitive decline. He needs to look like he can't care for himself. It feels wrong, Marcus muttered weakly, watching her tamper with the medication. Do you want to live in a 2-bedroom apartment? Elena snapped, dropping the tampered pills back into the prescription bottle. He's old, Marcus. He's had his time. Just let him take this for 2 more weeks. He won't even remember his name in court. Leo didn't gasp. He didn't run into the kitchen crying. He possessed a terrifying, quiet intelligence that he had inherited directly from me. Reaching into his pajama pocket, Leo pulled out the old smartphone I had given him. He bypassed the lock screen, opened the camera application, and switched to video. Holding his breath, the 12-year-old boy leaned slightly around the corner and hit the red record button, capturing the clear audio of their betrayal and the damning visual of his mother dropping the poisoned capsules back into the bottle. The morning light filtered harshly through the expensive automated blinds of the guest room. I woke up with a mouth that tasted like dry cotton and a skull that felt as if it had been packed with wet cement. For a terrifying 60 seconds, I did not know what day it was. I looked at my own hands resting on the duvet, studying the familiar calluses and the fading scar on my left thumb from a rogue nail gun in 1984, trying to anchor myself to reality. The room was spinning at a slow, nauseating rotation. I tried to sit up, but my legs felt entirely disconnected from my brain. It's happening, I thought, a cold spike of genuine panic piercing the fog. I'm losing the foundation. The structure is failing. I forced myself out of bed, leaning heavily against the sleek drywall. I needed coffee. I needed a routine. I shuffled out into the cavernous, echoing hallway and made my way down to the kitchen. The marble floors were like ice against my bare feet. Marcus was already there, dressed in a crisp navy suit, typing frantically on his laptop. He barely looked up as I entered. "Morning, Dad," he said, his tone clipped. "Sleep well?" I feel a bit heavy today, Marcus," I admitted, my voice rasping. I reached for a ceramic mug on the counter, but my depth perception was distorted. My fingers clipped the handle, and the mug shattered on the marble floor with a deafening crash. I froze, staring at the jagged pieces, a wave of profound humiliation washing over me. I was a man who had framed 3-story commercial complexes without breaking a sweat, and now I couldn't even pick up a coffee cup. Hey, it's okay, Marcus said. His voice was suddenly incredibly soft, dripping with an exaggerated paternal sympathy that made my stomach churn. Don't move, Dad, you might cut yourself. He didn't grab a broom. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his smartphone, and stepped back. I heard the faint digital click of the camera shutter. Then he took another step and took a second photo, capturing me standing helplessly over the broken ceramic in my pajamas, looking confused and frail. Marcus? I mumbled, squinting at him. What are you doing? Just documenting for the doctor, Dad, he said smoothly, slipping the phone back into his pocket. They need to see the extent of the motor function decline. It's for your own good. Elena will clean this up. Why don't you go back to bed? I didn't argue. I didn't have the strength to argue. I let him guide me back to the guest room like a toddler, feeling a crushing weight of despair settling over my chest. I spent the next 6 hours staring at the ceiling, mourning the mind I thought was rapidly abandoning me. At 3:30 in the afternoon, I heard the faint click of the front door closing. Marcus and Elena were out in the living room. I could hear the muted hum of the television. A moment later, my bedroom door creaked open. Leo slipped inside, still wearing his middle school backpack. He didn't say a word. He just turned around, pressed the small brass button on the doorknob, and locked it. I propped myself up on my elbows, blinking away the lingering chemical haze. Leo, you shouldn't lock doors in your parents' house. They get upset. Leo dropped his backpack on the floor and walked straight to my bedside. His young face was drawn tight, stripped of the usual easygoing demeanor of a 12-year-old boy. He pulled the old, cracked smartphone from his pocket. Grandpa, he whispered, his voice trembling slightly, not from fear, but from a profound, suppressed anger. You aren't sick? I let out a dry, hollow laugh. I appreciate the optimism, kid, but my brain is telling me a different story today. Your brain is fine, Leo insisted, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that demanded attention. Look. He tapped the screen and held the phone up for me to see. The video was shaky at first, framed by the dark edge of the hallway wall. Then, it focused on the kitchen island. I recognized the pendant lights. I recognized my orange prescription bottle. And then, I saw Elena. I watched, paralyzed, as my daughter-in-law systematically emptied my prescribed cognitive capsules. I watched her crush heavy over-the-counter sedatives into a fine powder and repack the shells. Then, the audio cut through the silence of the bedroom. Marcus's desperate voice whining about a 30-day bank deadline on a commercial loan. Elena's cold, reptilian response about my $5 million trust. And then, the line that felt like a nail driven directly into my chest. The emergency guardianship hearing is in 2 weeks. Just let him take this for 2 more weeks. He won't even remember his name in court. The video ended. The screen went black. I sat there in the quiet guest room, the silence roaring in my ears. The fog in my head hadn't completely cleared, but it was suddenly eclipsed by a tidal wave of clarity. I wasn't experiencing rapid onset dementia. I was being chemically demolished by the boy I had raised, my own son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the boy I had protected when his mother passed away. He was manufacturing my mental collapse to steal the wealth I had spent a lifetime building, simply because he was too incompetent to manage his own debts. A terrible, suffocating grief threatened to crush me. I put my head in my hands, my shoulders shaking as the reality of Marcus's betrayal took hold. You can build a house to withstand a hurricane, but you can never engineer a defense against the rot that starts from the inside. I felt a small hand rest on my shoulder. I looked up at Leo. Here was a 12-year-old boy who had just discovered that his parents were monsters. He had every reason to stay silent, to protect his comfortable life, to pretend he hadn't seen anything. Instead, he had risked everything to warn me. I'm sorry, Grandpa, Leo whispered, a single tear escaping down his cheek. I reached out and wiped the tear from his face with my rough thumb. The grief inside me began to harden, cooling into a cold, unbreakable steel. Marcus had mistaken my age for weakness. He had forgotten that before I was an old man in a guest room, I was a master builder. I knew how to dismantle a toxic structure, brick by brick. Leo, I said, my voice dropping an octave, finding its usual gravelly strength, hand me my pill bottle. He retrieved it from the nightstand. I popped the cap, took out a blue and white capsule, and twisted it apart over a tissue. Instead of the tiny, slow-release microbeads my doctor had prescribed, a fine, chalky white powder spilled out. "You see this, Leo?" I murmured. "This is a structural flaw. They think they've laid a trap for me. But a trap only works if the prey doesn't know it's there." Leo wiped his eyes, his posture straightening. "What do we do? Do I call the police?" "No," I said instantly. "If we call the police now, Marcus will deny it. He'll say Elena did it without his knowledge, or he'll claim it was a mix-up. He'll lawyer up, and they might still try to freeze my assets by claiming I'm paranoid and making things up. We don't demolish the building until everyone is outside the blast radius. We need more evidence. We need to let them carry this right into the courtroom." "But they're poisoning you," Leo argued, glancing at the white powder. "They think they are," I corrected him. I looked at the boy, marveling at his courage. "You took a massive risk recording this, Leo. A knight doesn't usually spy on the king's own son." Leo looked at the chessboard sitting on the table across the room. "A knight doesn't betray his king, Grandpa, not ever." The absolute conviction in his young voice was the anchor I needed. My son had failed me, but my grandson was a masterpiece. "All right," I said, a dangerous calm settling over my mind. "We are going to let them build this false narrative. We are going to let Marcus file his paperwork. But I need you to be my eyes and ears. Keep that phone hidden. Back up the video to a cloud drive tonight. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir," Leo nodded firmly. "And if they talk about the hearing or the lawyer, you record it. But you do not take any risks. If they catch you, they will take the phone, and they might send you away to a relative's house until this is over. You have to be a ghost in this house." "I understand." "Good." I swept the white powder into the tissue, balled it up and shoved it deep into my pocket to flush down the toilet later. I reassembled the empty capsule shell and placed it back in the bottle. An hour later, the heavy footsteps of Elena echoed down the hallway. "Grandpa, she's coming," Leo whispered, scrambling over to the chessboard to make it look like we were just hanging out. I leaned back against the pillows, letting my facial muscles slacken. I unfocused my eyes, allowing the manufactured dullness to return to my expression. The door opened without a knock. Elena stood there, holding the familiar silver tray with the glass of water and the blue and white pill. "Time for your afternoon medicine, Arthur," she cooed, her eyes gleaming with a predatory satisfaction. "We need to make sure you're taking care of that head of yours." I looked at her, fighting the urge to stand up and throw the tray through the window. Instead, I offered her a vacant, confused smile. "Thank you, Elena," I slurred slightly, reaching out with a trembling hand. You're very kind to an old man." I took the pill and placed it deliberately on the very tip of my tongue. I brought the glass of water to my lips, took a large gulp, and swallowed dramatically, ensuring she saw my throat move. "Good job," she smiled, taking the glass back. She turned on her heel to leave the room. The second her back was fully turned and she crossed the threshold, I quietly spit the untouched capsule into a napkin hidden in my palm. I looked over at Leo. The 12-year-old boy gave me a barely perceptible nod. The game had officially changed. Marcus thought he was playing a helpless old man, but he was about to play against a grandmaster. The following week required the kind of grueling, sustained acting I had never trained for. Every morning, I woke up with my mind sharp and clear, only to force my shoulders to slump, my eyes to lose their focus, and my speech to slow into a hesitant drawl. It was exhausting. It is a strange, terrible thing to pretend your mind is dying just to see how the people who are supposed to love you react. Marcus and Elena reacted with barely concealed glee. We were sitting at the massive glass dining table on a Tuesday morning. I was meticulously cutting a piece of toast into tiny, unnecessary squares, a nervous habit I had invented for my condition. Marcus checked his gold wristwatch, an expensive accessory he bought right before his commercial project started hemorrhaging money. He looked across the table at me, adopting the slow, loud voice one might use with a difficult toddler. "Dad," Marcus said, pausing to make sure I was looking at him. "We have a very important appointment next Thursday. It's with a special doctor and a judge. They just want to make sure you're getting the best care possible. Do you understand?" I let my fork clatter against the porcelain plate, blinking at him in slow, manufactured confusion. "A judge? Did I do something wrong, Marcus?" "No, Arthur, of course not," Elena chimed in, reaching over to pat my hand. Her skin was cold. "It's just standard procedure for your new healthcare plan. You don't have to worry about a thing. We're handling all the paperwork." Okay, I mumbled, looking down at my lap. If you say so, I get so tired lately. We know, Dad, Marcus said, his voice thick with a fake sympathy that made my jaw clench. That's why we're doing this. An hour later, Marcus and Elena were getting ready to leave the house. Marcus had told me they were going to run errands, but Leo had overheard them the night before. They were going to a luxury dealership across town to test drive a pair of imported SUVs. They were so confident in their trap that they were already spending my $5 million trust in their heads. As soon as the heavy front door clicked shut and the electronic deadbolt engaged, my posture straightened. The fog vanished. I walked briskly to the window, watching Marcus's sedan back out of the driveway and disappear down the street. Leo was at school. The house was empty. It was time to pour the concrete for the counter trap. I went into the guest bathroom, retrieved the small, tightly balled tissue from the back of the medicine cabinet where I had hidden it, and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Then, I pulled out my phone and ordered an Uber. 40 minutes later, I was stepping into the polished mahogany lobby of Jenkins & Associates in downtown Columbus. I had known Sarah Jenkins for 15 years. She was a brilliant, fiercely pragmatic estate attorney who had helped me structure my business succession and set up my revocable living trust after my wife passed. When Sarah's assistant ushered me into her corner office, Sarah stood up, a warm smile breaking across her face. "Arthur," she said, walking around her heavy oak desk to shake my hand, "it's wonderful to see you. You sounded urgent on the phone. How are you holding up at Marcus's place?" "I'm entirely sober, Sarah," I said, taking a seat in one of the leather guest chairs, which is a miracle considering what my son has been feeding me. Sarah's smile faltered. She sat back down, her professional instincts instantly overriding her pleasantries. "Explain." I reached into my pocket and placed the balled-up tissue on her desk. I carefully unfolded it, revealing the empty blue and white capsule shell and the pile of crushed, chalky white powder. "My cognitive maintenance medication," I said, my voice steady. "Or rather, what's left of it. Elena has been emptying the capsules and refilling them with heavy over-the-counter sedatives. They've been chemically inducing symptoms of severe dementia for the last week." Sarah stared at the powder, the color draining from her face. "Arthur, my God, are you certain?" "I am." I pulled out my tablet, the one Leo had used to back up the files from the old smartphone via the cloud drive. I tapped the screen, opened the video file, and slid the tablet across the desk. Sarah watched in horrified silence. The audio of Marcus whining about his commercial loan deadline played clearly. Then came Elena's cold voice, explicitly detailing their plan for the emergency guardianship hearing and the theft of the trust. When the video ended, the silence in the office was absolute. Sarah looked from the tablet to the tampered pill, and finally to me. Her eyes were blazing with a cold, righteous anger. "I am calling Adult Protective Services right now," Sarah said, reaching for her desk phone. "And then I am calling the district attorney. Arthur, this is felony elder abuse. This is poisoning. We can have them arrested before dinner." "No," I said, leaning forward and pressing my hand over the phone receiver. Sarah looked at me, bewildered. "Arthur, they are trying to destroy your mind to steal your estate." "I know," I replied calmly. "But if we arrest them today, Marcus will find a way to minimize it. He'll say he didn't know what Elena was doing. He'll say it was a misunderstanding. He'll lawyer up, drag it out for years, and he might still try to freeze my assets by claiming I'm paranoid. Sarah, in construction, if you catch a subcontractor stealing copper wire, you don't fire him on the spot. You let him load up the truck, you let him drive it off the site, and you have the police waiting at the scrapyard. You catch them with the load fully secured." Sarah slowly pulled her hand away from the phone. "What are you suggesting?" "Marcus filed an emergency guardianship petition, didn't he?" Sarah typed rapidly on her keyboard, checking the county court portal. She sighed heavily. "Yes, he filed it 3 days ago. The hearing is next Thursday. He's petitioning for total financial conservatorship and mandatory medical placement. He submitted an affidavit claiming you are a danger to yourself." "Good," I said. "Let him proceed. Let him stand up in front of a sitting judge and commit perjury on the record. Let him present his falsified evidence, and right when he thinks he's won, we drop the building on him." Sarah studied my face for a long moment. She saw the absolute unyielding resolve in my eyes. She nodded slowly. "You want to trap him in the courtroom?" "I want to make sure he can never come near my grandson or my assets ever again," I corrected her. "I want to restructure the trust today." For the next 2 hours, Sarah and I worked with the ruthless efficiency of a demolition crew. We dissolved my current revocable trust, which left the bulk of my $5 million estate to Marcus. In its place, we established an irrevocable educational and living trust, naming 12-year-old Leo as the sole beneficiary, with Sarah appointed as the independent third-party trustee until Leo turned 25. I completely disinherited Marcus. Not a single cent, not a single brick of my legacy would ever belong to him. "I'll have a private lab rush test this powder to get official documentation of the tampering," Sarah said. As I stood up to leave, she carefully scooped the pill and the powder into an evidence bag. "I will be at that hearing next Thursday, Arthur. I'll be sitting in the gallery. When the time comes, I will step forward." "Thank you, Sarah," I said. I took the Uber back to Marcus's house, arriving 30 minutes before they pulled into the driveway. By the time they walked through the front door, complaining loudly about the dealership's financing rates, I was back in the guest room, sitting in an armchair, staring blankly out the window. That evening, after dinner, Marcus came into my room. He was holding a manila folder and a black pen. His face was a mask of practiced, gentle concern. "Hey, Dad," he said softly, pulling up a chair next to me. "I need you to sign a few things for me." "Sign what?" I asked, making my voice tremble slightly. "Just the healthcare paperwork I mentioned this morning," Marcus lied smoothly, opening the folder. "It just gives Elena and me the authority to talk to your doctors and make sure your insurance covers everything next week. It's totally standard." He placed the document on my lap. I looked down at it. It was the official court acknowledgement of the emergency guardianship petition. By signing it, I was supposedly acknowledging that I had been served with the legal notice of his attempt to strip me of my human rights. He was treating me like an idiot. He truly believed the man who had raised him, provided for him, and bailed him out of every mistake he ever made was entirely gone. "Just sign right there at the bottom, Dad," Marcus coaxed, uncapping the pen and pressing it into my hand. I looked up at him. I looked directly into my son's eyes. I searched for a flicker of guilt, a micro-expression of shame, or any sign of the boy I used to know. There was nothing. Just cold, desperate greed. "Whatever you think is best, Marcus," I whispered. I pressed the pen to the paper. I deliberately loosened my grip, allowing my hand to shake violently. I dragged the ink across the signature line, creating a messy, jagged scrawl that looked exactly like the handwriting of a man whose nervous system was failing. I handed the clipboard back to him. "Perfect," Marcus smiled, snapping the folder shut with a sharp, victorious sound. "You did great, Dad. Get some rest." He turned and walked out of the room, entirely unaware that he had just secured the final load-bearing pillar of his own prison. The trap was set, the hearing was locked, all that was left was the collapse. There is a distinct sound that cheap corrugated cardboard makes when it is folded and taped. It is a hollow, scraping noise. For 3 days leading up to the hearing, that sound became the soundtrack of my afternoons in the guest room. Elena had gone to a local liquor store and brought back a stack of discarded boxes. She didn't even bother buying proper moving crates. I sat in my armchair, forcing my eyes to remain vacant, as my daughter-in-law systematically packed up the few belongings I had brought from my home. "We won't need these heavy wool coats where you're going, Arthur," Elena hummed to herself, tossing my favorite winter jacket onto a discard pile on the floor. "Sunridge is temperature-controlled, very cozy." I knew about Sunridge. As a contractor, I had once been asked to bid on a roof repair for the facility about 10 years ago. It was a bleak, underfunded, state-run warehouse on the edge of the county line, notorious for its high staff turnover and distinct smell of bleach and boiled cabbage. It was the place you sent someone when you wanted them to quietly disappear. Sunridge?" I stammered, letting my jaw hang slightly slack. "Oh, it's a wonderful place, Arthur," she lied, sealing a box of my shirts with a loud tear of packing tape. "You'll have a roommate, and they have bingo on Tuesdays. Marcus and I will come visit, eventually." She didn't even look at me as she said it. To her, I was already a ghost. I was just an obstacle standing between her and a $5 million trust account, and she was currently boxing up the last of my dignity to make the transition easier. I watched her tape the last box, thinking about the structural integrity of a lie. When you build a facade over a rotting foundation, you have to work constantly to maintain the illusion. Elena and Marcus were working so hard, completely unaware that I held the blueprints to the demolition. Later that night, the house was quiet. The digital clock on the nightstand read 1:15 a.m. The lock on my door clicked open with a soft metallic snick. Leo slipped into the room, his tablet clutched tightly to his chest. He moved with the practiced silence of a kid who had spent the last 2 weeks playing a high-stakes game of espionage in his own home. He sat on the edge of the bed, the pale blue light of the tablet illuminating his focused face. "The payload is secure, Grandpa," Leo whispered, using the terminology we had quietly adopted. I backed up the original video and audio from the old phone onto a secure cloud drive. I downloaded a hard copy onto this tablet, and I emailed another copy to Miss Jenkins, just like you asked. "You deleted the originals from the old phone?" I asked softly, dropping the impaired act entirely. "Wiped clean and restored to factory settings," Leo confirmed. "If Dad finds the phone now, it's just a brick. There's nothing connecting it to me." I placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling a profound surge of pride. At 12 years old, this boy was showing more courage, competence, and moral clarity than his father had shown in 42 years. "Tomorrow is going to be difficult, Leo," I told him, making sure he met my eyes. "You are going to hear your father say terrible things about me in that courtroom. You are going to see me act like a broken man in front of a judge. It will look like we are losing." Leo swallowed hard, his grip tightening on the tablet. "I know. A bridge has to bear the maximum weight of the load before you know if it's truly sound," I said. "Tomorrow we let Marcus put all his weight on his lies. You just sit quietly in the gallery until Miss Jenkins calls your name. Do you understand?" "I won't let you down, Grandpa," he whispered. "You already haven't," I replied. Thursday morning arrived with a cold, gray drizzle. Marcus came into my room at 7 o'clock holding a plastic garment bag. For the past week, I had been spitting out the tampered pills every single time Elena handed them to me, flushing the crushed sedatives down the toilet. My mind was razor sharp, but physically, I forced my body to adopt the posture of a hollowed-out shell. "Let's get you dressed, Dad," Marcus said, his voice carrying that familiar, repulsive tone of fake pity. He didn't bring me one of my tailored suits. Instead, he had dug out an old, ill-fitting brown tweed jacket I hadn't worn in a decade, paired with a pair of faded gray slacks. The shirt he handed me had a slightly frayed collar. I stood silently as he helped me button the shirt. When it came time for the tie, Marcus deliberately tied the knot off-center, leaving it loose and sloppy around my neck. He ruffled the collar of the jacket so it sat awkwardly on my shoulders. Finally, he reached out and slightly messed up my carefully combed hair. I looked in the mirror. Staring back at me was a disheveled, confused, entirely incompetent old man. Marcus was constructing the perfect visual aid for his perjury. "Perfect," Marcus muttered to himself, admiring his handiwork. "We just need the judge to see what I see, Dad. Come on." The Franklin County Courthouse was a heavy, imposing structure of polished granite and dark oak. As we walked through the metal detectors and took the elevator to the family court division on the 4th floor, I shuffled my feet, keeping my head bowed. Elena walked a few paces ahead of us, carrying a thick binder of evidence, her heels clicking victoriously against the marble floor. Leo walked quietly behind us, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his face an unreadable mask. When we entered courtroom 4B, the air felt dense. It smelled of lemon pledge, old paper, and nervous sweat. I was guided to a heavy wooden chair at the petitioner's table. Marcus sat next to me. Elena and Leo took seats in the first row of the gallery just behind the wooden partition. I kept my eyes down, but my peripheral vision was working perfectly. 2 rows behind Elena, sitting near the aisle, was Sarah Jenkins. She was wearing a sharp charcoal gray suit, a sleek leather briefcase resting on the bench beside her. She didn't look at me. She just sat there, waiting like a coiled spring. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Judge Harrison, a stern-looking man in his early 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, took the bench. He opened the file in front of him, adjusting his glasses. "We are here on an emergency petition for adult guardianship and conservatorship in the matter of Arthur Vance," Judge Harrison announced, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "The petitioner is his son, Marcus Vance. Mr. Vance, you may proceed." Marcus stood up. He buttoned his expensive suit jacket, took a deep breath, and turned his face toward the judge. It was a masterclass in manipulation. "Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice wavering with perfectly calibrated emotional distress. "This is the hardest day of my life. The man sitting beside me is my father. He built a company from nothing. He raised me. But he is no longer the man I knew." Marcus paused, wiping an imaginary tear from the corner of his eye. "Over the last month, his cognitive decline has been terrifyingly rapid. Marcus continued. He wanders the house at night. He doesn't know what day it is. Just last week, he couldn't even hold a coffee cup without dropping it, and he didn't understand what had happened. He didn't recognize my wife Elena for an entire afternoon. I sat perfectly still, listening to my son lie to a judge, feeling a cold, dark finality settle in my chest. I have submitted the medical evaluation from his primary care physician, noting severe and rapid onset dementia symptoms, Marcus said, gesturing to the binder Elena had provided the clerk. I've also submitted photographic evidence of his motor function failure. Your Honor, he is a danger to himself. He controls a complex $5 million trust that he no longer has the mental capacity to comprehend. He is vulnerable to exploitation. We are simply asking for total medical and financial conservatorship, so we can place him in a specialized care facility where he will be safe. Marcus sat down, looking exhausted and deeply sorrowful. It was a beautiful performance. Judge Harrison looked over the paperwork. He flipped through the photos Marcus had taken of me standing confused over the broken ceramic mug. He read the doctor's notes taken while my system was flooded with the heavy sedatives Elena had poisoned me with. The judge let out a heavy sigh, the kind of sigh a man makes when he is burdened with a tragedy he sees every day. He closed the file and looked down at our table. His eyes were filled with a gentle, patronizing pity. Mr. Vance, Judge Harrison said, his voice softening as he addressed me directly. I slowly lifted my head. The court was dead silent. I could hear the faint hum of the HVAC unit overhead. I could feel Marcus's false concern radiating beside me. I could feel Sarah Jenkins watching from the gallery. Slowly, deliberately, I raised my right hand. I reached up to my collar. My fingers grasped the sloppy off-center knot of my mismatched tie. With a swift, precise motion, I pulled the knot tight and centered it perfectly against my collar. I squared my shoulders, rolling the manufactured hunch out of my spine. The facade of the broken old man vanished in an instant, replaced by the rigid, unyielding posture of a master builder. Mr. Vance, the judge repeated, a flicker of confusion crossing his face as he noticed the sudden shift in my demeanor. Can you tell me where you are right now? The silence in courtroom 4B was absolute. I looked up at Judge Harrison, holding his gaze with the steady, unyielding focus of a man who had spent a lifetime inspecting blueprints for fatal flaws. I am in courtroom 4B of the Franklin County Courthouse, Your Honor, I answered. My voice did not tremble. It resonated through the quiet room, deep and gravelly. The date is Thursday, the 12th. It is approximately 10:15 in the morning, and I am entirely, completely aware of why I am sitting in this chair. Beside me, Marcus practically jumped. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled out of water. The color rapidly drained from his face. Dad? Marcus hissed, reaching for my arm. Dad, sit back down. You're confused. I ignored him, keeping my eyes locked on the judge. Your Honor, the man sitting next to me is my son. He has just stood before you and presented a fabricated medical history, perjured himself on the public record, and attempted to use this court to facilitate the theft of my estate. I do not have dementia. I have a son who is desperately over-leveraged on a failing commercial real estate project and needs my $5 million trust to avoid bankruptcy. Judge Harrison lowered his glasses, his expression shifting from gentle pity to intense razor-sharp scrutiny. He looked from me to Marcus. Your Honor, please. Marcus scrambled to his feet, his tailored suit suddenly looking very cheap as panic set in. My father is having a lucid episode. This happens sometimes with his condition. He gets paranoid. He invents these wild stories. It's exactly why he needs a conservatorship. That is a lie, Your Honor. The new voice came from the gallery. Sarah Jenkins stepped through the wooden swinging doors that separated the gallery from the court well. She carried her leather briefcase and moved with the undeniable authority of a veteran attorney who had just caught a thief red-handed. And who are you? Judge Harrison demanded, though his tone was more intrigued than angry. Sarah Jenkins, Your Honor. I'm an estate attorney, and I am the retained legal counsel for Arthur Vance, she said, approaching the petitioner's table. My client is not having a lucid episode. He is completely competent, as a secondary, independent neurological evaluation I arranged 3 days ago will confirm. What he is suffering from is severe, deliberate chemical impairment, and we have the evidence to prove it. Marcus stumbled backward, his knees hitting his chair. In the front row of the gallery, Elena half stood, her face a mask of pure terror. Objection! Marcus stammered, looking wildly around the room. She can't just interrupt this. This is a private family matter. This ceased to be a private matter the moment you filed a fraudulent legal petition in my courtroom, Mr. Vance. Judge Harrison snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. He pointed a finger at Marcus. Sit down and do not speak again unless spoken to. Marcus collapsed into his chair. Sarah Jenkins handed a sealed manila envelope to the bailiff, who passed it up to the judge. Your Honor, that is a certified toxicology report from an independent laboratory, Sarah explained. For the past 2 weeks, Marcus and Elena Vance have been systematically emptying my client's prescribed cognitive maintenance medication and refilling the capsules with crushed, heavy, over-the-counter sedatives to artificially induce the symptoms of dementia you saw in the doctor's report. We submitted a tampered capsule to the lab. Judge Harrison opened the envelope, his eyes scanning the lab report. The muscles in his jaw tightened. Furthermore, Sarah continued, turning slightly toward the gallery, we have digital proof of the tampering, as well as a recorded confession of their intent to defraud this court. I would like to call a single witness to present it. Call your witness, Miss Jenkins, the judge ordered. I call Leo Vance. Elena shrieked. No, absolutely not. He is a child. You cannot involve my son in this. Bailiff, Judge Harrison warned, his voice dangerously low. If that woman speaks again, remove her from my courtroom and place her in a holding cell. The courtroom fell dead silent. Elena sank back into the wooden bench, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with horror as she watched her own 12-year-old son stand up. Leo did not look at his mother. He did not look at his father. He wore a crisp, button-down shirt and a small tie. He walked down the aisle, stepped through the swinging doors, and took the witness stand. He carried the digital tablet securely in both hands. He looked at me. I gave him a single proud nod. Hold the structure, Leo. State your name for the record, young man, the judge said softly. Leo Vance, sir, he replied, his voice clear and unwavering. Leo, your grandfather's attorney says you have something to show the court, Judge Harrison said. Can you tell me what it is? It's a video, sir, Leo said, setting the tablet on the wooden ledge of the witness box. I took it a couple of weeks ago. I heard my parents talking in the kitchen in the middle of the night. They were talking about Grandpa's money. So I used an old phone Grandpa gave me to record them. Marcus buried his face in his hands. A low, pathetic sob escaped his throat. Leo tapped the screen of the tablet. The volume was turned all the way up. The audio echoed through the cavernous courtroom. First, the court heard Marcus complaining about the bank deadline and his impending bankruptcy. Then, the video clearly showed Elena standing at the kitchen island, emptying my prescription bottle and crushing the white sedative pills. And then, Elena's cold, cruel voice filled the room, sealing their fate completely. The emergency guardianship hearing is in 2 weeks. Just let him take this for 2 more weeks. He won't even remember his name in court. Leo paused the video. The silence that followed was suffocating. It was the sound of a hollow pillar finally snapping under the crushing weight of the truth. Judge Harrison stared at the tablet, and then he slowly turned his gaze toward Marcus and Elena. I had seen angry men in my life, but the look on the judge's face was something far beyond anger. It was an absolute, cold disgust. Mr. Vance, Judge Harrison said, his voice barely above a whisper, which somehow made it more terrifying. You stood in my courtroom, swore an oath to tell the truth, and attempted to legally enslave your own father. You chemically poisoned an elderly man, falsified medical records, and committed egregious perjury, all while your 12-year-old son watched. Marcus couldn't even look up. He was violently trembling. The petition for emergency guardianship is dismissed with extreme prejudice, Judge Harrison declared, striking his gavel. He immediately looked over at the bailiff. Bailiff, do not let Marcus or Elena Vance leave this building. You are to detain them in the courthouse holding area. I am personally calling the district attorney's office, and I'm issuing an immediate referral to Adult Protective Services for felony elder abuse, fraud, and perjury. Dad, please, Marcus whimpered, finally looking at me. Tears were streaming down his face. Please, they're going to arrest us. I'll lose everything. Tell them it was a mistake. I slowly stood up from the table. I looked down at the boy I had raised, the boy I had shielded from every hardship, the boy who had tried to erase my mind for a paycheck. I taught you how to build a structure, Marcus, I said, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. I taught you about foundations and integrity and load-bearing walls, but you took everything I gave you and used it to build a prison for me. I stepped away from the table. You only demolish a building when you're sure everyone is outside the blast radius. You are entirely on your own now. Fortunately, your son has chosen to be a good man. I walked over to the witness stand. I held out my hand. Leo took it, stepping down from the box. Together, we walked down the center aisle of the courtroom, passing Elena, who was sobbing hysterically as the bailiff approached her row. We pushed through the heavy double doors and walked out into the cold, clean air of the Columbus afternoon. 3 weeks later, the final pieces of the wreckage were cleared away. Marcus's commercial real estate project defaulted. The bank seized his assets, including the sterile, modern house he and Elena had been so proud of. Both of them were currently out on bail, facing multiple felony counts that carried mandatory state prison time. Sarah Jenkins assured me that the district attorney was not interested in offering a plea deal. As for me, I moved back into the house I had built 30 years ago. The custom oak banister felt exactly as it should under my hand. The rooms were no longer empty. I was sitting in the living room, the fire crackling in the hearth. Across from me sat Leo. When Marcus and Elena were arrested, Sarah and I immediately filed for emergency custody of Leo, which the family court granted without hesitation. He was safe. His future was permanently secured by the irrevocable educational and living trust I had established. The $5 million that Marcus had destroyed his life to steal was now entirely locked away, designed only to ensure that the brightest, bravest boy I knew would never want for anything. Leo was staring intently at the hand-carved wooden chessboard resting on the coffee table between us. He had been studying the board for 3 minutes. Finally, he reached out, picked up his knight, and moved it across the board in a perfect L-shaped strike. He set it down with a soft click. "Checkmate," Leo said quietly, looking up at me with a small, genuine smile. I studied the board. I was completely boxed in. He had sacrificed his bishop 3 moves ago to draw my defenses out, and I had fallen for it entirely. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a deep, rumbling laugh. "You got me, kid. You saw right through the structure." "You taught me," Leo replied, leaning back in his own chair. He looked around the warm, quiet living room, completely at peace. A knight never betrays his king. I looked at my grandson, knowing that my legacy was finally perfectly secure. "No," I smiled. "He certainly doesn't."